Hi, I'm Arceel, and welcome to my presentation on D&D survival rules. This video was made because of a comment by Joshua ZX on my Ranger presentation talking about his issues with the current iteration of Ranger due to the way some rules are handled in more recent editions of D&D. After a response from me, he asked for a video on current wilderness travel to show his point. That's how we got here. Now, Joshua asked for the rules be presented raw, or rules as written. Unfortunately, due to the way some things are worded in the player's handbook, as well as me being just kind of dumb, this is somewhat difficult. I'm no expert on raw rules, so if I miss anything, which I probably will, feel free to correct me in the comments and I'll make a comment with said fixes. With that stated, let's get into it. Okay, so this video is mainly about survival and wilderness travel rules, but it was spurred on due to discussions about the Ranger. So because of that, I'll be inserting discussions about how the Ranger and some other character abilities interact with the survival rules when they become relevant. Also because of some rules vagueness, as previously stated, some interpretations that I have of the rules may be different from yours. For the purposes of this video, simply replace my interpretations with yours in case I get them wrong, because it's still supposed to be raw, and come to your own conclusions based on that. Finally, as with my class presentations, this is mainly based on the 2014 5e rule set. I have access to finding the 2024 versions of the rules, but I can't exactly look them up in my own books, as I do not own them, nor do I plan on owning them. Cool. To start this discussion, let me get into the basics of survival. Food and water. Technically, shelter is in there too, but shelter is pretty easy to manage in your typical D&D adventure, so we're just going to be ignoring that. As per the 5e PHB, characters need at least 1 pound of food and 1 gallon of water per day to operate as standard. This is different if you aren't a medium-sized creature, but we can ignore that for the main purpose of the discussion. A character is able to function normally without food for 3 plus their constitution modifier days. Not eating past this threshold gives character 1 level of exhaustion each day. Eating the normal 1 pound in a day resets that timer. You can also survive on half rations, eating half of the needed amount in a day, but it still counts as going a half a day without food and will rack up for the exhaustion penalty. As for water, getting half the needed amount of water in a day requires you to make a DC 15 con save or suffer a level of exhaustion. Getting less than half the minimum amount automatically gives you a level of exhaustion. And on top of that, you gain 2 levels of exhaustion if you already have at least 1 level. In case you forgot, here's the old exhaustion table. 6 levels, and you're dead. Fun. The last foundational thing to manage is carrying capacity. You can carry a number of pounds up to your strength score times 15. With variant encumbrance, you start suffering penalties for getting to certain thresholds of that capacity. Going forward, these are the things that characters will need to manage during their excursions. As environment and dangers change, the need for food and water, and to an extent carrying capacity, stay with you. Outside of active travel, you also have the option to shortcut this process with lifestyles, where you simply pay a little fee to cover all of your needed expenses. Again, this is only for things like long downtime and just whatever not active play. To begin wilderness travel, firstly we have the pace at which you are traveling. The player's handbook assumes an 8-hour traveling day going either slow, normal, or fast. Normal pace is 3 miles an hour for 24 miles in a day, slow is 2 miles an hour for 18 miles in a day, and fast is 4 miles an hour for 30 miles in a day. It also splits them into minutes per day, but those are really the important time frames that we're going with. You are able to use stealth when going slowly, and you have a -5 penalty to your passive perception when going fast. Additionally, if you have a mount, you can double your pace for 1 hour within a travel day. Using stealth on slow pace marches is just a stealth group check against a perception check or a passive perception of whatever you're trying to hide from. You reverse the roles for when you're trying to spot danger on the road. This is where the first of the Ranger's Natural Explorer features comes in handy. While in your favorite terrain, you can also use stealth while going at a normal pace. You can also do a forced march when you try and travel for longer than 8 hours in a day, and for each hour past 8, you make a DC 10 plus 1 for each additional hour, Constitution saving throw, or suffer a level of exhaustion. The pace at which you're going can be modified if you're going through difficult or harsh terrain, letting you go half as far when trying to traverse it. This includes having to climb anything, swim across bodies of water, and crawling. Furthermore, especially rough terrain can require an athletics check to even cross. Second of the Ranger's abilities, you are unhindered by difficult terrain while traversing in your favorite terrain. As a side note, waterborne vessels specifically are limited by the vessel's own speed to determine how far you can travel, and this cannot be modified through usual means. While traveling, your group may also be formationed into ranks to determine where everyone is in relation to each other should something happen during travel. Your group is split up into a front, some middle, and a back rank. If there's only 2 ranks, there's no middle ranks. And if there's only 1 rank, then you just have a front rank. This can be important for determining threats from a specific location, as potentially only certain ranks in the marching order can spot them, or maybe only certain ranks are affected by a certain hazard. During travel, you also have a few tasks you may do. This includes navigating, mapping, foraging, and tracking. It should be noted that while you are doing one of these tasks, you cannot be on the lookout for danger and thus do not contribute your perception to trying to notice hazards, unless of course you're a ranger in your favorite terrain. Navigating is simply you making survival checks when the DM calls for it to not get lost. The DMG has suggested DCs depending on the environment, as well as letting the navigator get a +5 bonus if you're going at a slow pace, and then a -5 penalty for going at a fast pace. Sort of coinciding with navigating is mapping. No ability check is required. Mapping just makes it so you can't be alert. You are focused on drawing your map, which can aid your party in not getting lost while backtracking. The Ranger's Natural Explorer ability also makes it so you can't get lost in your favorite terrain, so these roles may be unneeded depending on where you're traveling. The Outlander background's ability Wanderer also states that you can recall the general terrain and geography around you, notably without a favorite terrain restriction. Based on the wording, however, I would say that this only applies to the mapping and not the navigating, as it seems you need to already be familiar with the region you're traveling through for it. Again, this is just one of those vague spots in the rules. For foraging, you make a survival check to find food and water. The DMG also has recommended DCs based on the type of environment, and in the case of multiple people foraging, each forager makes separate checks. On a success, you roll 1d6 plus the forager's wisdom modifier, and you find that many pounds of food and gallons of water. As a ranger in your favorite terrain, you find twice as much food as normal. As an outlander, you are always able to find food and water for yourself and up to 5 other people, as long as the environment that you're in can provide such. So, depending on how small or big your group is, you won't have any problems finding your required resources, I guess. The book also doesn't say, but I would rule that you would still need to use the forage action to find all of that. But the most important aspect of the game undermining foraging? Good Berry. While it is only learned by druids, Good Berry is a level 1 spell that provides a creature, any creature, with enough nourishment to last 1 day. And you create 10 of them per cast. A gargantuan creature needs 64 pounds of food and 64 gallons of water per day. Or 1 good berry. Remember, this is available at level 1. So if you have a druid, forget foraging, I guess. The last task that can be done during travel is tracking. This would be for if you are following the tracks of another creature, likely in place of navigating, and you make survival checks to follow them. The DMG has DCs and modifiers depending on the conditions surrounding the tracks of the creature or whatever, and the ranger also gets to know the number of creatures, the size of the creatures, and how long ago the creatures passed through the area when tracking. Besides monsters and rough terrain, there are a few other hazards that may get in the way of your progress. The first of these I want to go over is falling. If you fall off of a great enough height, you will take damage upon hitting the ground. You start taking a 1d6 damage at a 10-foot fall and adding on a d6 for every other 10 feet, to a maximum of 20d6. The next thing is suffocation. Say drowning, getting buried alive, what have you. You can hold your breath for 1 plus your constitution modifier minutes, to a minimum of 30 seconds or 5 rounds if you have a negative modifier. After this time, you can live for a number of rounds equal to your constitution modifier to a minimum of 1 round, and then you're dead. Some other conditions you may encounter on your travels is extreme temperatures. First, let's go over extreme heat, which is classified in the Dungeon Master's Guide as temperatures at or above 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Firstly, you need 2 gallons of water per day in hot environments instead of the usual 1. Without access to drinkable water on your person, you also need to make constitution saves at the end of each hour or you gain a level of exhaustion. The DC starts at 5 and increases by 1 for each hour that you don't have access to water. Creatures in medium or heavy armor or in heavy clothing have disadvantage on this roll as well. I find this last part somewhat strange, as it's actually recommended to have heavy clothing in hot environments so that you retain sweat, which keeps you hydrated and cooled down for longer. But that's just how it works in the game. Anyway, any creature that's resistant or immune to fire damage is unaffected by this, as well as creatures suited for living in those types of environments. Think camels and the like, I guess. On the opposite end, extreme cold is classified as temperatures at or below 0 degrees Fahrenheit. A creature exposed to these extreme colds must make a DC 10 Constitution check at the end of each hour or gain a level of exhaustion. Same stipulations. You ignore this if the creature has resistance or immunity to frost damage, has cold weather clothing, or is suited for the environment such as polar bears, penguins, narwhals, that kind of thing. There's also rules for strong winds, which imposes disadvantage on ranged attacks and perception rolls based on hearing, as well as extinguishing any open flames, dispersing fog, and making non-magical flight impossible. Strong winds in sandy areas or areas where a lot of dirt or cement can get kicked up causes you to also have disadvantage on sight-based perception rolls. Then there's heavy precipitation, which makes the area considered lightly obscured for other rules, as well as imposing disadvantage on sight-based perception rolls. In the case of heavy rain specifically, it extinguishes open flames and imposes disadvantage on hearing-based perception rolls as well. Going into higher elevations can also be difficult, as going 10,000 feet or higher above sea level makes breathing more difficult. It causes every hour you travel in these conditions to count as 2 for the purposes of determining how long you can travel in a day. It effectively just makes everything difficult terrain. You can become acclimated to these environments, however, and travel unhindered if you stay in that kind of region for 30 days or more. At elevations of 20,000 or more feet above sea level, it is not possible to acclimate unless you are already native to those kinds of environments. Beyond general region conditions, there's also smaller hazards you can run into. The first of which is desecrated ground, which is essentially dirt with bad vibes. They're areas of evil energies which can be detected by a detect evil and good spell and causes undead on those grounds to have advantage on all of their saving rolls. You can remove desecrated grounds by spreading holy water, which removes a 10-foot by 10-foot area of desecrated ground, or by using a hallow spell, which clears all desecrated ground in the spell's range. Frigid water is really cold water. I imagine with a temperature at or below 0 degrees Fahrenheit, as it acts similarly to extreme cold. A creature can stay in frigid water and suffer no effects for a number of minutes equal to its constitution score. Each additional minute requires a DC 10 Constitution save or suffering a level of exhaustion. Creatures with frost resistance or immunity, or those adapted, don't suffer said penalties, but those in cold weather gear still do, so there's a little bit of difference there. Quicksand, as a hazard, is a pit that is usually 10 feet by 10 feet in area and 10 feet deep. A creature that stands on quicksand sinks 1d4 plus 1 feet into it automatically and becomes restrained, sinking another 1d4 feet at the start of each of its turns while it's still in there. While you aren't completely submerged, you can get out on a strength check with a DC of 10 plus however many feet you have already sunk into the quicksand. Otherwise, you're completely under and suffocating. A creature outside of the quicksand can still help you out by using its action to pull you, and then in that case the DC is 5 plus how many feet the creature is submerged in the quicksand. Razor vine is a type of plant that can grow in wild tangles on the ground or as hedges or on the side of buildings. The DMG gives stats for a 10-foot high, 10-foot wide, and 5-foot thick hedge of razor vine, which is somewhere on screen right now. Coming into direct contact with the razor vine your first time causes you to make a DC 10 dexterity save, or you take 1d10 slashing damage. Slippery ice is a type of difficult terrain that requires you to make a DC 10 acrobatics check for the first time you try to move on the ice in your turn, or else you will fall prone. Thin ice isn't difficult terrain, but has a weight tolerance of 3d10 times 10 pounds per 10-foot squared area of thin ice. And whenever something exceeding this weight tolerance is on the ice, well, it breaks and everything in that area falls through. So now that we've covered your basic needs, the basics of travel, and the hazards you may find while traveling, what are the things you do in between that time, or when you're injured? Resting is a mechanic that helps you alleviate harm done to adventurers. There are two types of resting: short rests and long rests. Short rests are periods of, at minimum, 1 hour, where the characters resting can't do any extended strenuous activity. So you're only doing things like walking around, laying down, tending to your wounds, reading, stuff like that. At the end of a short rest, you can spend any number of hit dice to regain your hit points, rolling the hit dice and regaining that many points plus your constitution modifier for each die that you expend. Long rests are periods of, at minimum, 8 hours of little to no strenuous activity, with 6 of those hours having to be you actively resting, so laying down, sleeping, tending to your wounds. If you're a race like the elf where you have your trance, where you only need to sleep for 4 hours, essentially, you only need to do that for 4 hours. That being said, only if the rest is interrupted by 1 or more hours of heavy activity is the rest nullified. To put that into perspective, a round in D&D 5e is 6 seconds. That's 100 rounds of combat that you can do and still have the full effects of a long rest take place. And what are those effects? You regain all lost hit points and regain up to half of your total hit dice back, with a minimum of 1 die. A character can't gain the benefits of more than 1 long rest in a 24-hour period. It must have at least 1 HP at the start of it to actually gain those benefits. So you can't be dead and get all your HP back. There's another healing related activity characters can take during downtime, and that's called recuperating. After 3 days of downtime spent recuperating, a character can make a DC 15 Constitution save to either end an effect on them that would stop them from regaining hit points, or to gain advantage on saving throws against a specific poison or disease affecting you for the next 24 hours. The Dungeon Master's Guide also has a few extra optional rules that you can use for your games. While not the default, it's still a rules as written thing in my mind if they're also presenting this for usage in official printed material. First are healing variant rules. There's healing kit dependency, which makes it so you have to expend a use of a healer's kit to regain any hit points from hit dice during a short rest. I would also extend this to long rest, but that's not what it says in the book. There's also the option of healing surges. Once per rest, you can spend up to half of your hit dice as an action to regain that many hit points as during a short rest. This includes adding your constitution modifier to each die. You also regain all hit dice at the end of a long rest and a quarter of your hit dice at the end of a short rest. Finally, there's slow natural healing, which makes it so, just like in a short rest, you have to expend hit dice to regain hit points at the end of a long rest. There's also rest variants. For epic heroism, it reduces rest times to 5 minutes for short rests and 1 hour for long rests. Simple as that. And then for gritty realism, short rests are now 8 hours and long rests are 7 days. You're no longer taking a nice long rest at the end of your travel day, just a little short rest. It also means you wouldn't be taking short rests throughout it either. It seems like a small change, but I think if you're going for a full-on survival campaign or just a more gritty one, having to account for that time and not getting a bunch of short rests in a day really does impact things. There's also two supplemental materials which affect the Ranger and add some new rules: Xanathar's Guide to Everything and Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. That being said, I want to put less weight on these as the two books are just supplements. While they are meant to be used in your games, of course, they aren't required to play D&D as advertised. They can add new cool things, but the game should be fully playable and complete with both the Player's Handbook and the Dungeon Master's Guide. Xanathar's gives you penalties for resting in medium and heavy armor, allowing you to only regain a quarter of your total hit dice and not losing any levels of exhaustion should you do so. It also adds the rule where if you don't take a long rest in a 24-hour period, or rather go without sleep in that period, you must make a DC 10 Constitution saving throw, or else gain a level of exhaustion. And then the DC increases by 5 for each consecutive day you have without sleep. Tasha's doesn't add any new survival rules, but it does present some alternative skills for the Ranger. While it keeps the flavor of the Ranger intact, in my opinion, it seems to be going in a different direction. That is, replacing more of the wilderness survival aspects of the Ranger with more combat abilities. I think the survival mechanics of 2014 5e are fine, but when new content is actively replacing this functionality with some combat ability, and the DMG even recommends to sometimes just skip over the wilderness travel sections, I think it's pretty telling in how the game is going to evolve. So, that's about all of the various survival rules and wilderness travel rules that I can find. The Ranger doesn't directly interact with all of them, but with Wisdom being a core ability score for them and being able to have proficiency with survival and perception, Rangers can be very good for a lot of wilderness situations. The rules, while lightweight, get the job done, and I think it's fine for the type of game D&D, at least currently, is trying to be. That being said, this is in a vacuum, and Joshua did mention other editions of D&D in his comments on his issues with the 5e Ranger. Now, I happen to have some very legally acquired PDFs of all the editions of D&D. So let's get into some 2nd edition Advanced Dungeons and Dragons material. I'm using 2nd edition for a few reasons. Firstly, there's a swath of BECMI and 1st edition content, so I thought I'd show some love for 2nd edition. It's also easier to parse than the other 2 editions, and I just enjoy it more. It should be noted, however, that while 2nd edition was still produced by TSR as Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, it's still considerably different from 1st edition and BECMI in a lot of ways. So what I'm about to say is not completely what the Ranger was like pre-WotC. So I'm going to be going over some of the rules that 2nd edition presents that have analogs or direct counterparts in current 5e. In 2nd edition, Ranger is considered a subclass of the fighter, and thusly behaves somewhat similarly. Rangers also have to be good aligned in this edition and follow a code of honor much like the Paladin, which was also a fighter subclass. That being said, the Ranger actually has thief skills, at least a few of them. Hide in shadows and move silently. They also have priest spell casting, but can't actually cast until level 8. They get animal companions at higher levels like a Beastmaster would nowadays, and have bonuses to interacting with animals. They have an early version of Favored Enemy where you just get a bonus to your attack rolls against said enemy, and also actually have a penalty to conversing with them. As a fighter subclass, a Ranger can actually use all armors, but has to wear studded leather or lighter to gain some of the benefits of the class. So, essentially light armor. 2nd edition also has a variant rule for skill proficiencies, things like blacksmithing, alchemy, glass blowing, that kind of stuff. But even if you weren't using that optional rule, a Ranger would still get tracking proficiency and rank it automatically. If you were using those proficiency rules, a Ranger would get this skill for free. As for survival rules, you notably didn't have certain amounts of food and water you had to have in a day, at least that I could find. But you did have prices for things like a day's meal, which I suppose stood in for that, for your food and water intake, and you had things like rations, which were sold out by the day or week. Encumbrance was also weirdly an optional rule in this edition, and worked with a table that would slow you down as you carried more items. This would also affect how far you could travel because it was affected by the character's movement rate. You could walk your movement in yards for combat, in feet for dungeon exploration, and in miles for wilderness travel. A day's marching in 2nd edition lasted 10 hours, and you could travel double your movement rate. So if you had a movement of 8, you could travel 16 miles in a day. And if you were encumbered to where that would go down, you could travel less. You can also travel at double your movement rate, but this would stop you from being on the lookout for things like traps, hazards, enemies, secrets, that sort of stuff. And forced marches were also a thing, allowing you to travel another half of your movement rate. But you have to make a con check versus death with a -1 penalty each day of forced marching, or else you would have to stop and rest for a half day for each of those forced marching days before you could do it again. So basically, let's say you were going on a forced march for 4 days, and then you failed the con check versus death. You would have to then rest for 2 whole days, half a day for each of those 4 days of forced marching, before you could attempt a forced march again. Swimming is also a proficiency in 2nd edition, but not like the other skill proficiencies. You just kinda have it or you don't if it makes sense for your character to have it or not. A proficient swimmer can swim up to half of their movement rate, much like it was difficult terrain. But you can also try to swim your full rate with a successful strength check. This swimming can be maintained for a number of hours equal to the character's constitution score, after which you would need to make constitution checks each hour or start losing points of your constitution, and also gain an attack penalty. If you're swimming for your full movement, this would also reduce your strength score and require a con check every hour instead of just past those initial constitution hours. Lost ability scores can be regained by resting, regaining you 1d6 lost ability score points per day, and also your attack penalty recovers by a rate of 2d6. For climbing, thieves have a dedicated climbing ability, but everyone can climb. There was also a mountaineer proficiency you could take to increase your chances of succeeding on climbing something rough, and then thieves and mountaineers could use special gear to climb, while regular people just couldn't. Mountaineers could climb rough surfaces well, but not very smooth surfaces, while thieves could climb those very smooth surfaces and also just have a better chance. Regular people had the least percentage chance to successfully climb a surface. Mountaineers were better, and thieves were the best. There were also some modifiers based on the conditions to this chance of success. So basically, like rangers and their survival skills now, everyone can do it. It's just that rangers, or in this case thieves, were better at it. As for resting, it was brutal back then. You regained 1 HP per day of rest. If you did nothing for a day and just focused on healing, you could regain 3 HP in a day of bed rest. And then, if you spent a whole week in bed rest, only then could you start adding your constitution bonuses to the amount that you healed. The Dungeon Master's Guide also has a few extra things. It goes over using mounts during travel, in which case they were more for carrying more equipment than going faster. There were modifiers for overland travel, and details on naval and aerial movement. Important stuff, but you don't need it for the core of what we're going over. This section went by pretty quickly, and it might not sound like much, but I'm only going over a few rules of 2nd edition, and I'm not putting in a lot of detail into it. There's a lot of bookkeeping in those early editions, and there's a lot of similarities and a lot of differences, and frankly, I don't know in what environment you could say the respective edition's ranger performs better in. I could go into details of the other D&D editions on this topic, but this video is already going to be substantially longer than the other videos that I've made, and I'm already going out of the bounds of what Joshua wanted anyways, so we're gonna end it off here. So, as for the ranger and how it fares, you can come to your own conclusions about that. I still want to say that the 5e ranger and what it can do is fine. I think 5e wilderness travel and survival rules are fine, but there are noble ways to just undermine them in the current game alongside some of the systems already being pretty forgiving without the variant rules. The older editions had a lot more detail on minor systems such as just swimming, and you can decide whether you like that or not, and whether you think it's better for the game or not. Personally, I think it's pretty cool. Maybe not all of it, but some of it, right? Anyhow, this is the end of the overview, so feel free to leave your thoughts and opinions in the comments. Okay, bye! Alright, so just a few notes for after the video. I apologize for it coming out a little late. It took a little bit more time and effort than I was expecting it at first to take. Also, I might have been a little preoccupied playing World of Warcraft with my boyfriend. Anyhow, I'm probably going to be making a community post, if I can, with most of this information, maybe some more stuff later, but the gist of it is my college semester is about to begin, so that kind of eats into my time for doing stuff. So either the videos aren't going to come out as fast, or they're going to be a lot more short form content. As for what I'm wanting to do on the channel, the main thing is making content about not D&D. I'm probably still going to do some videos of like the presentation style. One of the things I had in mind was going over the various clans and bloodlines of Vampire the Masquerade. But I also wanted to talk about things like RuneQuest and Glorantha, and just other games that I really enjoy. For D&D content,
I did make that one short that was a presentation on Eldritch Blast, so I could do other things like that for spells and abilities or maybe monsters. And those were just a few of my ideas. But I mean, if you have anything you want to see potentially, feel free to tell me, and it might happen. So.